What would you say if I told you that your anxiety is not actually your fault? What would you say if I told you that there are forces at play which are beyond your control, which are keeping you stuck in your anxiety? And what would you say if I told you that there are companies and people that are making billions of dollars out of your anxiety and out of your misery? In this video, I'll reveal to you the secret causes of anxiety that I discovered through decades of research in trying to get to the bottom of my own problems. These things are hiding in plain view and are so accepted that we no longer question them. We're like fish, and these are the water that we swim in. And stick around to the end, because the last point may well blow your mind and cause you to question many things in your life. I know it did for me. And by the way, if you're a business owner, a professional, or an entrepreneur who's currently struggling with stress, overwhelm, and anxiety and would like to work one-on-one with me, please go ahead and click the link you see in the description below this video. We're currently offering a 12-week cognitive reprogramming course, which is taking business owners like yourself from a place of stress, fear, and dread to a place of happiness, physical ease, and authentic expression. And it's getting results for people in as little as 8 weeks. So if you'd like to find out if this course is a good fit for you, then by all means go ahead and click that link in the description, and I'll see you on a discovery call. Right, so let's dive into the meat and potatoes of this video. Now, I've got to tell you right off the bat, if you're struggling with anxiety in 2024, then I'm afraid you're nothing special. In fact, hundreds of millions of others are going through the exact same struggle all across the world. And these astronomical numbers have prompted many experts to talk about an anxiety epidemic which is sweeping the planet and is only set to get worse. So what's going on? Why are so many people anxious? First of all, in this video, I'm not discussing obvious things which apply to the individual, such as genetics or childhood traumatic experiences and that kind of thing. I'm talking about far more subtle, sinister, and pernicious factors which are affecting our society and our species as a whole. The first of these is the use of social media. Now, this can cause anxiety in many different ways. One of the first ones is FOMO, or fear of missing out. We see things going on in other people's lives on Facebook or Instagram, and it fills us with this dread that we're missing out on something special in our own lives. Social media also creates a syndrome called compare and despair, where we're comparing our lives to other people's lives, and we get very depressed about that. And the thing about social media is that we're basically all spreading lies about ourselves. We present an image of our own life, which is not actually true. Other people then take that at face value, feel depressed about their own lives, and in turn, they're also spreading curated and retouched images of their own life. So we're creating this cycle where everybody feels depressed about the life they're living when all of us are just telling each other lies through our Instagram accounts and our social media. Social media also exposes us to a far greater crowd of people than we would ever naturally be exposed to. And there's something called Dunbar's number by an anthropologist called Robin Dunbar, and he says that the human brain is basically evolved to identify about 150 different faces, because that's the kind of number of tribal unit we might have been used to in the past. And with social media, we're exposed to the judgment of so many other people, so that when we post an image, we feel that kind of anxiety of being judged by a countless number of people when we put something out into the public forum. Social media, with its constant bombardment of reels and shorts and so on, has also started to fracture people's attention. There are studies that say that the average attention span is now down to 8 seconds. And this is a big difference from in the past, where people would read books or be able to focus their attention on longer term tasks. This also creates anxiety, where the mind is constantly jumping between different points of focus, and it creates a very disturbed and anxious state of mind. The second cause of modern anxiety, which is somewhat related to social media, is the use of smartphones, screens, and technology. And what this does, by looking at a screen all day, it's causing us to use our foveal vision, which causes us to focus in very sharply on a small area and onto details. Whereas in the past, when we were roaming the savannah or living in more traditional environments, we would use our panoramic vision more. And there are many studies that show that accessing the panoramic vision actually has a relaxing effect on the brain. And you may have experienced this if you go to the sea and look out at the shoreline and take in the whole horizon, or if you go into the countryside and you have a wide panoramic vista in front of you. This can create a very relaxed state of mind. But what's happening is we're living in a place where we're using our foveal vision the majority of the time. And this is actually linked to a heightened state of anxiety in the brain. Other studies have shown that actually having a smartphone on the table or nearby, even if you're not using it or the device is turned off, can actually create the symptoms of anxiety. Just having that thing near you means that you're not able to focus on the person you're talking to. It creates more of a stress response. There's sweat on the skin and increased heart rate and so on. So there is studies that show that even just having this technology around us, even when we're not using it, can induce states of anxiety. The third cause of modern anxiety is the mainstream media industry and being bombarded constantly with negative news stories. This creates a background level of existential fear and dread. As humans, we have a negative bias and take more notice of negative news, and negative news sells. So we have a skewed vision of what's going on. We believe that it's just constant riots, constant war, famine, all of these negative things that are going on, environmental degradation, whatever it is. I'm not saying they don't exist, but there is a negative bias, and the mainstream media industry feeds us these things, which creates a sense of paranoia and existential dread. And in my own life, I used to be a foreign policy analyst for the government, and I found my own levels of anxiety dropping markedly when I stopped reading the news every day. I used to have to read it for my work. I now do not consume a large amount, if any, mainstream media because I know it's going to be negative news stories. It doesn't help me on a day-to-day level. And also anecdotally, I've worked with clients who've seen a huge drop in their anxiety when they gave up their addiction to news and to this mainstream media. They felt they had to be interesting and be up on current affairs so they would have something to say in conversation. So they were binge consuming hours of news, and it was really ramping up their anxiety. I highly recommend cutting news and mainstream media out of your life, and I would wager that not being up on current affairs does not affect you negatively and will have positive effects on your anxiety. The next huge player in the anxiety epidemic are big pharma companies. These companies make tens of billions of dollars every year from SSRIs, beta blockers, and other anti-anxiety medication. So they have absolutely no vested interest in seeing you recover from anxiety. And in many cases, they have funded advertising campaigns which have created the concept of disorders, which allows them to repurpose existing medications as anxiety medications. So be aware of the role of big pharma companies in this anxiety epidemic that we're currently seeing in the world. And related to this are psychiatrists, general practitioners, and healthcare professionals, especially psychiatrists. They have a strong bias towards just dishing out drugs. I'm not sure what the situation is like in your country, but in the UK and in many countries I've visited, I can get dished out SSRIs, beta blockers, and anxiety medication almost as freely as I could go and buy Tic Tacs. It's the first port of call. If you tell someone you really want to delve into the root causes of your problem and get to the bottom of what's going on with you, you're going to be met with more resistance than if you go into a GP office or a psychiatrist and just say, I would love to go on an SSRI immediately. That's my experience, and it's the experience of the people that I've spoken to. These drugs are dished out with alacrity. Many psychiatrists and many GPs seem to be very, very willing to get you onto medication without ever questioning what's your family background, what's your traumatic experiences, any of this stuff. It's just like straight to the medicated route. And as I've said before on this channel, this should always be a last resort. You should not be going to medication as your first port of call. And now the final point which is fueling our current anxiety epidemic, which really blew my mind, is a concept called evolutionary mismatch. And this is the idea that the environment we now find ourselves in today in modern society is completely inappropriate for the way that we're actually evolved. If you think that the human brain and body has been evolving over millions of years, and we now find ourselves in a very artificial environment with artificial light, a lot of noise, a lot of traffic, a lot of pollution, very flat concrete surfaces. The human mind and body is not adapted for this at all. Even if you look at the human foot, it's actually meant to mold itself over very rough terrain. And we wear shoes, we walk on flat surfaces. This is causing postural problems. When we have problems in the posture, we feel worse in our mind. We sit in chairs all day, which is also ruining the postural muscles of the body, and we're exposed to all kinds of stress and anxiety inducing stimuli. And most importantly is we are social primates, and what we find ourselves in now is a situation where we sit atomized and boxed up in little cubicles at work, at home, cut off from our fellow man. And I believe this is one of the key drivers in the anxiety epidemic. The fact that evolutionarily, we would have felt safety in numbers. We would have had a large family unit, a tribal unit, and now we spend much of our time either alone or we see some of our family now and again. But of course, this creates an existential dread because you are vulnerable to predation when you're by yourself. If you choke in your kitchen on a fish bone, you're going to drop down dead and no one's going to know about it. Whereas if you're in a group, then someone could save you. So it makes sense that there's this background feeling of dis-ease and a lack of safety, a real insecurity. And I feel that insecurity is very much linked to anxiety. And there's just this huge feeling of vulnerability. So modern society is not the society that we've been gradually adapted to over millions of years. It's all happened very quickly, especially with smartphone usage and technology nowadays. So we find ourselves in a very strange artificial environment. And I often think of it as if you take something like a chimpanzee and put him in a nightclub, he's bombarded by all that music and stimuli and all that noise and everything else, and it's going to completely freak out his nervous system. And I see modern man much like that chimpanzee that's been thrown into a nightclub. And another really key part of this is the way that we're so isolated from each other. There's no community, and there are many reasons for this, such as the breakdown of traditional religious institutions and many different sociological factors. But the point is, what we're also experiencing alongside the anxiety epidemic, and I would say almost certainly linked to this, is the loneliness epidemic. And this is so serious that the US Surgeon General has even written about this and published a report on the severity of the loneliness crisis in the US. And it's also been picked up by the World Health Organization and recognized as a serious threat to people's health. If you just spend so much of your time lonely, as I did, loneliness was the main background feeling for much of my life up until I started taking care of my anxiety in my early 30s. For me, it's very clear that this loneliness is also driving the anxiety epidemic, because as social primates, one of the biggest killers is to be cut off from our fellow man. Right, so that's everything I wanted to cover in this video. If it's been helpful, please like this video, subscribe to the channel so you can stay up to date on future content. If you want to ask me any questions, you can reach out to the email also in the description of this video. And until the next video, be well, and I'll see you all soon.